Ja, einen wunderschönen guten Abend. Zunächst mal an Ece Temelkuran. Wir heißen Sie ganz herzlich in Heidelberg willkommen mit einem Applaus. This is a warm welcome to Ece Temelkuran.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. Thank you for having me.
Ich freue mich sehr, dass Sie gekommen sind, diesen für mich sehr besonderen Abend hier zu erleben und auch eine besondere Autorin. Und wir haben ja gesagt, es wird ein Abend in englischer Sprache. Deswegen steige ich jetzt ins Englische, damit sie mich nicht so staunend ansieht. So, yeah, we'll switch to English now, so you will be part of the party. And yeah, we're very happy to have you here, to have you present an extraordinary book, which is not something I think, but people like Margaret Atwood think, who gave you a wonderful blurb saying that this is essential reading. And after having read this book, I really understand why it is. And I hope we will make you understand why this is a very important book for today's times and today's movements. Ece Temelkuran. So maybe some of you of our audience know things about you, but I would like to hear a few things about how you became Ece Temelkuran that we know about. So you first started off as a very successful columnist. There's been tons of things like you were one of the most read political columnists in Turkey. You are one of the most influential people on social media. Just to give you a number, she has 2.7 million followers on Twitter, which is not a little number. So there's a huge audience that follows your thinking, your doing, your writing, and your particular way of putting things into words. So you were so successful, and tell us what happened then.
Well, I don't feel successful to start with. I have been fired for 2 times from the papers that I work for political reasons, obviously, and I'm not living in my country, so it doesn't feel a great success, to tell you the truth. But when you ask me how I started off, I'm thinking of my age. Like when I was 8 years old, in fact, I started off then when I learned how to write, in fact. So I think writing comes before you learn how to write. It's about seeing things. It's about the way you see things differently than the other people. And then on, I was 16 when I published my first article. And when I started journalism, I was 19. And I always loved to say that I started as a doormat. Nobody was saying hello, nobody was taking me seriously. And to be taken seriously, I was dressing up like an old woman when I was 19. Probably I looked ridiculous then, but yeah, that's how I started journalism, as a reporter, as a writer, and so on. And then, yeah, columns started happening. I was so young. I was 27 when I started writing political columns. And one time, one of the ministers in 1990s, I think, beginning of 2000s, he saw me in real life and he said, don't go out too much because everybody thinks you're a, mature woman. You look like a kid. So this is how young I was when I started. So yeah, after several years, I felt a little bit like a real person, let's say.
But you said it's more about seeing. So who encouraged you to see?
Oh, yeah, my mother. She's a painter. And I had a funny childhood, in fact. She was painting during the night. And I had my first typewriter from my father, an Olympia, when I was 13. So I was writing. She was painting, and we were showing our work to each other. And I really thought that everybody lives like that. Everybody's writing, doing music, talking about cinema, and so on. We weren't a wealthy family. We were, typical middle-class family. My father is a lawyer. But I really thought that everybody's reading books. And, this is the way, and writing them as well. So I was 8, I think, when I said for the first time, I'm going to be a writer. And it wasn't an ambition, but rather, telling a fact. This is what's supposed to happen. So it happened eventually.
You recognize yourself as a writer, and additionally to writing novels, you started to writing columns, you started writing novels. But I want to go back to your column work because there was one thing you did as a journalist. You said you were fired twice. And there was, tell us of one of the two times you were fired. Tell us one story why you were fired.
Okay, let me tell you the last one. That's the most, funny one. It lasts quite short. It was 2012. I was in Tunisia. In fact, I was writing a novel called Women Who Blow on Nuts. Actually, it is a different title in German. Was nützt mir die Revolution, wenn ich nicht tanzen kann? Applause. Yeah, thank you. So I was writing that novel in Tunisia. So I wrote these two columns. There was a massacre on the Iraqi-Turkish border. The army, accidentally killed a dozen of kids, thinking that they were terrorists, whereas they were actually cigarette smugglers. And at the time, our then Prime Minister, Mr. Erdoğan, did not want anyone to write about it. And I was a smart person in media who wrote about it, one of the very few people who wrote about it. So I just got this telephone call from my editor-in-chief. It lasted, this much. Hi, Ece. Hi. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. This was it. I was fired, literally. The word fired was not even, pronounced. Yeah. So, it was the end of my journalism because it was a time it is still so. It was a time when you were fired because of political reasons. That means that you're stigmatized as a persona non grata and you're not getting any job anywhere anymore. So then on, I started only writing books and writing in English for other international media outlets.
So this was in which year?
2012.
2012. So in 2012, you lost your job in a very short conversation, as you just said. And still you start the book with another year that you call the year you lost your country. And with another event, I think everybody here in the room has followed, very interested in the media. It was the day of July 15th, 2016. It is the opening of a book that I find very literary, very well written, very sensitive in the way you handle art, where we can see that there's both a political columnist and a novelist at work. Can you tell us, without reading this passage, what happened that night, not only to Turkey, but also to you?
This is the night of the attempted military coup, 2016, 15th of July. Actually, in tragedies in my country, do not come alone. They're always accompanied by absurd humor, absurd comedy, so to speak. It's a tragically comic things. And that was a night of tragic comedy, sort of. It was very tragic, though. So everything started in a very absurd way. I was watching the TV, it's prime time, and then there are a dozen of soldiers on Bosphorus Bridge. They are cutting the traffic, and they're shouting, "This is not a drill, go home, this is a coup." And people like, what coup? Like a dozen of soldiers? And then I called my boyfriend. I said, "There's a coup happening, come back home." And he laughed at me, like, what coup? This is not a coup, this is just a funny thing. And, after half an hour, still these absurd footage is going around. There is a rumor that there is a military coup. But actually, we are very experienced about military coups in Turkey. In my lifetime, I have already seen 2 coups. And, it's like that in Turkey. So we know how these things happen. They first take the media, and then they take the politicians under custody. So there's a lack of communication to start with. But this was a frenzy of communication. Every minister was on the screen, people were talking about it, and people were making jokes about it actually on social media for hours, for a few hours, I think. People kept joking about it because nobody really believed what's happening. And then on, when you start hearing the fighter jets passing, everything was, nothing was funny after that. To start with, nobody was joking after the fighter jets in Istanbul and in Ankara started, flying over the cities. Fighter jets make this sound when they go with, this extreme speed. Something happens when they surpass the speed of the sound. It sounds like, something is exploding. So I thought for several times that they are bombarding Istanbul. And then, it's so funny because you're learning real-time war terminology on social media. We learned that it is not actually bomb explosion. It's actually because fighter jets speed and so on. And then they started bombarding the parliament. That made me really, that froze my, blood because it reminded me of Reichstag and, all that horrible things. But then, you look at parliament being bombarded. It is tragic. It is incredible. But then meanwhile, you hear news, parliamentarians cannot find a bomb shelter in the parliament. They're running around the parliament. And then when they find the bomb shelter, they cannot find the keys to the bomb shelter. So, you imagine some guys running around parliament. So it's not really funny, but it is tragically comic in a way. So the entire night was like this. People, kicking the tanks or, throwing stones at fighter jets and so on. So it was a very interesting night, I should say. Not like any other coups that we have seen in modern world history, so to speak.
So a little later, you come up with this book, How to Lose a Country. And there's a very good, and I find very funny moment, a comic, when you are in London and you talk about these things. And then there's this woman in the audience, and what does she say?
Yeah. I published another book, Turkey, the Insane and the Melancholy, and the German version is Euphorie und Wehmut. And somehow the British publication overlapped with the coup. So this brought a lot of media attention to the book. So there's this event, it's crowded, and I'm telling about what happened in Turkey, this, this horrible stuff that we are going through and so on. Because after the coup, of course, Mr. Erdoğan took it as an advantage to consolidate his power. So, massive class actions started happening, massive imprisonment started happening. So I'm telling about these things. And finally, probably I lost myself and I was so passionate and so on. And one of the women in the audience brought her hands together and said, "What can we do for you?" And I said, "I feel like a panda now, a baby panda trying to be adopted via a website." I said this, nobody laughed. So the funny thing is, the irony of this is this was happening right after the Brexit. And right after Trump came to power. So after my panda joke did not, create a lot of laughter, I said, "So what can I do for you, actually? Because we have been through for years what you are just beginning to witness. Because of Brexit, because of Trump, they started going through things that we in Turkey experienced for 2 decades. So the political insanity that they found themselves in were actually quite familiar for us. So I wanted to tell the woman that she is not in a position to help me. She has to help herself. That's why actually I wrote the book. This is what I can do for you. You asked me how did I feel during that night in 2016, 15th of July, during the military coup attempt. I was in my garden. I had a garden on the hills of Bosphorus, and it was a grandma garden, sort of. It's not a trimmed, handsome garden. There were fruit trees and so on. So I remember looking at the grapes and the other fruit trees and thinking, okay, this is the time I'm losing this garden now. It's not going to be same again, and so on. But I also felt already, I'm losing a country. Everything will be worse than it is already. So I might be going abroad, maybe, and so on. I already felt a kind of rootlessness, so to speak. And when you are away from your country, I don't call myself an exile or refugee, whatever, because those are too loaded words to use, emotionally loaded as well. But when you're away from your country, when you're living in a foreign country, there is only one thing you're not allowed to do, even by the most welcoming country, by the most welcoming community. That is to help people. They always want to help you, but you're never allowed to help them. And it makes you feel so horrible because I'm not used to being helped, whereas I am very used to helping people. So this is why partly I wrote this book. And there's a little bit of, trying to protect my dignity as well. No, lady, you cannot help me, I can help you, sort of thing, attitude. But that somehow came true because they found the British people, Europeans, and American people found themselves in this mess that they have no idea how it happened to them. And, they follow the same steps that we followed, towards authoritarian regime. So actually, I had lots to give them. So that's why I wrote the book, actually.
You do have a lot to give them. But before we do, I will dig into one thing that I really enjoyed when you talk about. It's when you said the moment of dignity and that you don't want to be helped. And I saw an interview where you said you don't come from a culture where you speak about your own weaknesses. You don't come from a luxury word where, so you had a real problem using a word that many Western luxury people like to use. Can you come out? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, trauma.
No.
What is that?
Heartbroken.
Being heartbroken. Yeah.
Being heartbroken.
Yeah. Yeah. It is because, especially when you're writing politics, and when I write novels, but people mostly know me through my political writing. And when you're a woman, especially when you're a young woman, you don't talk about your heart your heart being broken or anything, because it's mainly a male environment, politics and journalism. So you try to be tough, and sometimes tougher than men are. So you don't talk about these things. Also, trauma is another word. Europeans, or especially Americans, use this word a lot. I'm traumatized. People would make fun of you when you say that in Turkey. Because every day is a trauma and nobody wants to hear about your trauma.
So there's a trauma competition in the West.
Oh my God, big time.
Who had the worst day? Well, you came up with this wonderful thing, like, how can you help us? And I think you did a great job in this.
Thank you.
Helping us, because when I read this, there were so many moments where I felt, wow, this is what we are going through, and I hope we're not going to go through this.
Oh, yeah.
So, Ece Temelkuran wrote and analyzed, you have 7 steps into dictatorship. And you're going to present them yourself, but I will pick 1 or 2 interesting aspects of every chapter, because she has done so much analysis and the book is quite big and there's so many interesting things. And I have tried to pick 1 or 2 aspects in each chapter that could be interesting for us in Germany to talk about, whereas we have nothing to do with this, as you know.
Yeah, because they always say that.
The countries in the West never like to have to do anything with authoritarian regimes. And there is a lot to talk about for us as well. And I think there's a lot to learn for us as well. Not only because you have been through this, but because, as you said, you have learned how to see and you have learned how to express what you see in a very impressive way. So let's start with number one. Which is your number one thing? We have 7 steps, and if we manage, we're going to try to be finished by 9. If we're going to be fast, we're going to finish all 7. If not, you'll have to read the rest. But we're going to start with number one. Which is number one?
Create a movement, because party is over. This is the first thing that they do. These are not only 7 steps, but also they are global common patterns of right-wing populism in every country. The book is not about Turkey. The book is about every country that is facing right-wing populism. So, yes, we learned how it happened in Turkey, but, the funny part of or interesting part of the story is that I saw same things happening in Germany, in France, in Britain, obviously, United States, obviously. And I'm not even counting Poland, Hungary, and so on. Creating a movement is such a nice thing, because even the word movement, energizes mentally, it's mentally energizing, because party, it's so 19th century. It is so bulky. It is so old. It's not working, and so on. So they don't form a party. They don't establish a party, but they create a movement. And it applies to 21st century communication tools as well, because 21st century communication tools allows you to be connected without becoming a member. So you are loosely connected to something. So movements are very efficient, and they're working very well, in fact, with the right-wing populist ideals today. And I have to say something. When I said 7 steps from democracy to dictatorship, we all know how democracy looks like, more or less. But we shouldn't imagine dictatorship like Second World War Germany or something. We shouldn't think about uniforms and sulking faces and, well-formed institutions and networks. We should think about something else. It might happen in a more colorful, more fun, and with no uniforms at all. So when you think about dictatorship, don't think about Mussolini or Hitler or, Stalin, so to speak. So creating a movement is also very convenient to make this, right-wing populism that is something very magical, that is something very open to everyone. So you don't have to have an ideology, you don't have to have a political goal, you don't have to have political experience, so to speak. You just can be connected to this movement.
So we have seen this, for example, in Austria, when the Kurz did this very same process. But there's 2 things I would like to know, and one is Macron has also created a movement, but one would not label it right-wing. How do we differentiate between the modern progressive movements and like Fridays for Future? And how do we really differentiate? Because some even say that the progressive movements are fascist. We come to that later. But what's like the marker? And for Germany, I found interesting that you used for Turkey the quote, "We are the people. We are the real Turks." I found this very interesting for Germany, because Germany as well has the same quote in East Germany when Pegida started to march. They said, "We are the people," which they were co-opting a quote of liberty fighters in the past. So how come they constructed this in Turkey? In Germany or in Great Britain, they construct this by a multi-ethnic country. You can say this ethnicity is like the better the better German or the better whatever. What did you do in Turkey?
When you create a movement, you always speak "we the people" language, obviously. But "we the real people" is something really, it works magically, because when I say I am the real people, what are you left with as in choices? You have 2 choices. One, you have to prove that you are as real as me, or you have to prove that I am not real, which is impossible. So, and whoever gets to claim it first, when I say I'm the real people, then you're second. You have to prove now that you are real, that I am unreal, whatever. So it creates this manufactured, superiorities, so to speak. So it creates a logical game that is impossible to, cut through. But one important thing is about real people. It starts with, what is the thing that makes you a real person, one of the real people? For Germans, I'm sure it's something. For Austrians, it's something. For United States, it's another thing. But it has one fluid aspect to it, which is interesting, because the leader determines who are real people. In Turkey, it started with being, pro-democracy. For AKP, when they created the movement, it was being pro-democracy and anti-corruption. But then, by time, it evolved to something else. It became more Sunni, Turk, conservative. No. And then it evolved again. It constantly evolves what real people is. And at the end, it all boils down to obedience. Obedience to the leader. This is what changes, what the difference is between a progressive movement and a right-wing movement. And when the difference between right-wing populism and a real progressive movement is that right-wing populism makes a claim that they are representing all people. And when you say all people, you're a majoritarian, on that majoritarian position already. But the, real progressive movements, they say we people, but they don't have the ambition to represent 100% of the people. And they take into consideration that people can think differently than them, and they can still be real people. But if you are not included in the supporter of right-wing populist movement, you are not real person anymore. That means you can be the enemy. That means you can be the traitor. That means you can be, killed, exiled, whatever.
Okay, so we've been through one. Now we come to number two. They created a movement. They created 100% people or not people. And then you come to number two, which is?
Disrupt this is my favorite. Disrupt the rationale and terrorize the language. When this happens, you have to, you don't even have to know the analysis. You can feel it. When you start feeling like, am I mad? Is everybody else mad? Or has the whole world gone mad? When you started asking these questions, this means that the language is terrorized and the political debate is dismantled. And funnily enough, these three questions, am I mad? Is everybody else mad? Has the whole world gone mad? Is actually a novel by a Russian novelist who's lived under Stalin regime. You see, we don't have a proper dictator like Stalin, who looks like a dictator, but we still feel the feelings that someone has felt under Stalin. I always think that this is interesting. Disrupting the rationale is something that we see in our own lives, actually, when we try to speak to right-wing populist supporters, or when we are hooked up in a conversation in social media about anything. In the book, there are several examples of it, but there is one example might be interesting. I'm going to read it from my phone because I don't have the English book with me. I wanted to decipher what kind of a logic game that right-wing populist discourse is playing and how it is dismantling our basic logic. That's why I wrote a fictitious dialogue between Aristotle and populist, and the right-wing populist. So Aristotle is saying it's, syllogism. It is this, famous line, all humans are mortal. Socrates is a human, therefore Socrates is mortal. So they are discussing this fact with the right-wing populist, Aristotle. Aristotle, all humans are mortal. Populist, that's a totalitarian statement. Aristotle, do you not think that all humans are mortal? Populist, are you interrogating me? Just because we are not citizens like you, but people, we are ignorant. Is that it? Maybe we are, but we know about real life. Aristotle, that is irrelevant. Populist, of course it's irrelevant to you. For years, you and your kind have ruled this place, saying the people are irrelevant. Please answer my question. This is Aristotle. Populist, the real people of this country think otherwise. Our response is something that cannot be found on any elite papyrus. Aristotle goes silent. Populist, prove it. Prove to me that all humans are mortal. Aristotle smiles nervously. Populist, see, you cannot prove it. He smiles. That's all right. What we understand from democracy is that all ideas can be represented in the public space and that they are respected equally. The God says, Aristotle, I'm sorry. Yeah, you cannot prove. Anyway, it goes on like this. I'm so bad at reading it, but at the end, Aristotle goes crazy because each time he makes a, argument, he tells a fact. Right-wing populist comes up with this, maddening arguments and maddening logic games that we see in our daily lives. In the book, there are Latin descriptions of this logic game that they are playing, because I wanted to show that they are actually playing the same game in every country to dismantle the political debate and to drive us crazy. And when they do this, it creates anger. We all become angry. For instance, in Germany, I'm sure we can think of an example from Germany about refugees, for instance. When they say it, and you know that it is not true, it is not correct, it is, absurd, you go angry. And then when you go angry, you forget the fact that they are playing a logical game and you start talking about your emotions, your anger, your outrage. And then you start not talking logically as well. So this is how this terror starts, and then it becomes a loop of anger, hostility, and so on and so forth.
You call it an infantile political language. I'd like to hear a little more about that, and that you see it represented by the leaders. Like, it's not only happening in an everyday conversation, but there's like this infantile language creeping from top from the leaders down to the bottom. So could you describe a little more about, for example, we all know him very well, Trump's infantile language, and what the strategy behind this might be?
It's so easy for Trump to talk. You have to know two words, great and tremendous. So he has a very limited vocabulary, and it is very good. The simplicity is always good for the masses. They feel they are, clever when they understand it. But I think there are many books right now about right-wing populism, and I'm sure there are many books written in German as well. One of the things most books do not have is that they take right-wing populism, that what we are going through right now, as if it happened like a few years ago. They describe right-wing populism as if something happened to Earth, like a natural disaster. All of a sudden, a star hit the Earth coming from outer space. They lack the criticism and analysis of capitalism and how capitalism reshaped our understanding of democracy in last several decades. The infantilization is not something that Trump or Boris Johnson or Nigel Farage in Britain brought to our planet. It was there since Ronald Reagan. It was there since Margaret Thatcher. When Margaret Thatcher said in 1980s that there is no alternative, and when that motto was echoed on the other side of the Atlantic by the old cowboy Ronald Reagan, we all started, gradually, we became infantilized, so to speak, since there is no alternative. So since capitalism is the best thing that can happen to humanity, why do we have to think anyway? Why do we have to, debate anything anyway? Also, accordingly, there was this new understanding, new zeitgeist, so to speak, saying that politics is corrupt. Politics is contaminating. Politics is boring anyway. It makes you boring to be interested in politics. And now, thanks to these guys, Trump and his ilk, we are now becoming more and more interested in politics, and also because of climate change for the new generation. And that infantilization has created these infantile masses, politically infantile masses, so to speak. And now we are seeing the extreme examples of this process. Trump is one of them, but in every country there is a figure like that. For Ukraine, for instance, they literally elected a comedian as a president. So this is infantile. This is like being completely, this is complete lack of seriousness and so on. But we have to see it as a process, not as if something Trump brought to United States or, Nigel Farage brought to Britain or AfD brought to Deutschland, I was going to say, Germany.
Which brings us to your third point, almost, which you want to tell us number 3 is, we had create a movement, disrupt rational and terrorize language, and 3 is?
Remove the shame. I think this chapter is the one that is closest to my heart. Because, people talk about politics, and we really talk a lot about political decay that we are experiencing, but actually behind it, I do think that there is a moral problem, a problem of morality, and we are angry with several stuff. For instance, there are now people going crazy on social media saying that the world is flat. And now you are supposed to, prove them that the world is round. So what do you do? When I say to you, the world is flat, what do? You show me a picture of the world, huh? You see, there's this picture of the planet and it is round. And then he says, but you made it up. It's a Photoshop. And then you say, no, but I am an astronaut. A few years ago, I went to, outer space, and I saw with my own eyes, and there were several people with me, we saw that the world is round. And then he goes, you know what? I choose to believe otherwise. So what is the problem here? Problem is a stupid guy and you alone and in this meaningless conversation, from one perspective, but from another perspective, there is a serious philosophical question. Why seeing is more valid than believing? Yeah? So how are you going to prove why seeing is more valid than believing? So behind all the political mess that we are going through, there is a serious philosophical problem, also a moral problem. And once, people, if they want to read the book, you'll see that shame and the transformation of shame in last several decades is one of the reasons that we are having this political insanity. so to speak. I'll give one example from the book, but there are other examples. I hope, I don't know how many of you would remember, but most people would remember the black and white photo of Vietnamese girl running naked from the napalm attack. That photo brought out millions of people in the United States, and eventually that photo stopped the war in Vietnam. Of course, there were other real political reasons, blah, blah, but people went out to the streets in millions. A few years ago, a 3-year-old kid, a baby, washed ashore on Aegean coast, Aylan Kurdi, a Syrian kid, and 1 week of media frenzy, and then it was it. It changed nothing, and millions were not on the street at all. So what happened to us is actually about, is actually very related to what we are going through. How did we become those people who have dinner while watching people being burned to death or, drowning in the sea and so on? So we are part of the decay as well. So we have to think about, I do think that we have to think about this as well. It's not easy to think about it as it is, for instance, to make fun about Trump.
I think what I find very interesting is that because it's been really fashionable, you start fact-checking, like whatever, CNN is showing all these news or lies, and then they fact-check. And in Germany, it's almost the same, you have somebody talking and then you fact-check. And you just say with number 3, in the post-truth world, it's not so important to fact-check, but to have this philosophical, moral conversation and a serious criticism of a neoliberal hegemony that's been going through the world since decades, actually. And where would you place the neoliberal relevance and criticism? I mean, we in Germany, we have had, for example, Hartz IV, which was a crucial point of how we handle people in need. Until today, people say that this has killed our social democrats in a way. They are almost gaining no voters. They don't have a real social look at the world. Is there a social democracy possible anymore in a country that was defined like that? So can you speak a little more about this? Post-truth is not a matter of fact-checking, but maybe a matter of informing people about where they have been ripped of their rights and their possibilities to make a living in a neoliberal market.
I was in New York. I was in New York Times. I was talking with the editors, and I said, how many millions did you put into this fact-checking thing? Because they're big on fact-checking, Americans. They go crazy. And, they really think that they can beat the post-truth age by fact-checking every funny thing that, Trump or his supporters say. This comes from apolitical thinking. Truth has never been apolitical. Facts are also political. So if truth is political, and today, if truth today is determined by those that oppress the people who do not like them, who are not like them, that means that truth is determined by the wrong political powers. Post-truth is not a new invention to start with. In 2016, I think Oxford Dictionary made it the word of the year. It was way before that. The first time post-truth was mentioned. It's in the book, the story of the word post-truth. It was 1991. So it started actually the numbness that neoliberal values created in people. And it started with understanding of truth as an open buffet. You can choose anything you want as long as you have McDonald's in your country. When there was this motto once, those countries who have McDonald's, they wouldn't confront each other. So neoliberalism, capitalism was this binding value of all the differences, and then accept, challenging that you can challenge anything and you can have other identities, other truths, you can believe in anything you want and so on. So the freedom was degraded to freedom of consumerism and freedom of choosing your belief, choosing your truth. So when you look at it like that, it is only natural that some of us would want to believe that the world is flat. And if they are many, that changes the truth, because political power determines the truth. And if they have political power, the world one day might become officially flat. And then you would feel really alone, thinking that, the world is round.
Then we are in a process already. So immorality is hot in the post-truth world. And we go to number 4, where you say, dismantle.
Yeah, this is not the most exciting thing, because, okay, it is, fourth step is just dismantle the judicial and political mechanisms. And when they are dismantled, I bet many of the people here would say, well, there was no democracy anyway. Well, there was no justice anyway. So what if it is completely, removed? The justice system in Germany was corrupt anyway. Or let's say the political mechanism was not really, functioning anyway. The cynicism that we all have up to a certain point actually is very much helping the final destruction of the political institutions and the judicial institutions that hardly hold themselves together. It is only natural that we are going through this. It's not right-wing populists or, authoritarian figures came to political stage and all of a sudden these democratic institutions are falling apart. They were already falling apart. That's why we see these guys. And there are millions and millions of supporters. One of the reasons that they are falling apart is there are several other reasons, but one of the reasons that's most current, I think, and I told a little bit about that in the book as well, the incompatibility of 21st century communication tools with the 20th century political institutions. We have these iPhones, we can do whatever we want with these things, but we cannot do anything about our democracy with our iPhones. I'm sure you have one of these competitions on TV, like Germany Got Talent or something. Is there such a thing?
Yeah, there is a lot of these.
Yeah, whatever. You can always vote for that, your guy, your candidate with your iPhone, but you cannot do with your iPhone anything for your parliament. So everybody wants to do something with this for democracy, but we cannot still. Those democratic institutions are not yet evolved enough to accommodate 21st century communication tools. But then these communication tools are social media, I'm talking about social media, are not regulated as well either. There is no democracy on planet at the moment that is powerful enough to manage a company called Facebook, which now is today running democracies, affecting democratic choices, creating political realities, fake realities, and so on. So if your democratic institutions, either national or international, are not powerful enough to, leash a kid, Zuckerberg, then you cannot really believe in democracy or your institutions, can you? Or judicial institutions. It is only natural that you feel like, they cannot even handle this Zuckerberg kid. What are they talking about? So there is a problem, communication tools being integrated, healthily integrated to 20th century democratic institutions. One of the reasons is that. So I think, right-wing populists are capitalizing and exploiting this vacuum, so to speak, this vacuum of power. They are abhorring that vacuum by, using social media, by using new techniques of politicization and so on.
Do you think it helps to see people like AOC when she interviews Zuckerberg and she corners him to the moment where he says, I don't actually care as long as things bring money?
Great question. Thank you for asking this. I was planning to write an article about this. I didn't then. AOC, Alexandra Octavia-Cortez, slapped Mark Zuckerberg in Congress during the interrogation. Do you say the interrogation or interview, whatever? So Mark Zuckerberg acted like he is. He doesn't know what's happening. Not like he is, but he seemed like he doesn't know what's happening. Facebook is a naive thing. It's a platform. I don't know why these things are happening and so on. And AOC was like a real good politician, was slapping him. Okay. These things, because it happened in Turkey, and I know how it feels, it gives you this feeling, it's great. And then you feel a certain, relaxation. So what happened at the end? AOC was very smart. She was great. We loved her more. And then, what happened? Nothing. These are inconsequential gladiator fights. And there's a lot about intellectuals and politicians being the gladiators of our times in the book. The audience goes, and then nothing happens.
This is something that I really liked when you elaborate. I don't know in which stage we are in that moment, but you elaborate how, the people, the Democrats, actually want the intellectuals to do the fighting for them.
Oh, yeah.
Like what you said. And I
this
find
is the gladiator thing.
And I really think that's so fascinating because it comes up that one columnist fights with the other, and then she beat him, and it's as if everything was a rhetorical game.
Yeah, especially when you're a woman, they put you with it was like that in Turkey, with a headscarf woman on screen, and you do the cat fight. And then the secularist part of the Turkey are supporting me, and AKP supporters support this headscarf. The columnist with a headscarf. It is so demeaning, diminishing or whatever. It's so humiliating, in fact, for both of us, for everybody. But then they love to watch those fights. This is today's gladiator fight, this, political fights on TV. And as arena fights in ancient Greek, they serve nothing more than this, temporary relaxation of the audience.
And the clicks of the media, because it's a personalized fight.
Definitely, especially when two women are angry. Oh my God, that is like the hottest thing for ratings.
But there's one thing you stress that is important for us, I think, is that somehow in many countries in the West, people don't believe that their institutions can somehow fail, that their institutions couldn't be strong enough. And I found it very strong when you said fascism has a creeping period. Like it doesn't come overnight and then you lost all your institutions, but it creeps in. And I found one sentence so sad, but it's true. We never think about this like that way. All the intellectuals we quote today, like Hannah Arendt, all these intellectuals were defeated by these guys. Yeah. So we use all these literature, all these thinkers, but in the end we have to admit that the others made their way through the institutions and that the others gained their ways. And I think this is why number 4, you said it maybe is a little bit on the drier side, talking about institutions, but it's one of the most important things.
It is.
When we look at what happened with Kavanaugh. But then we come to, you said, what happened? AOC did this, we laughed, we had our show, and what happened? And this is, I think, where we come to stage number 5, which is design your own citizen. What did you mean by this? Design your own citizen. I mean, all these people are watching stage 1 to 4, and then you say, now we have stage number 5, and the people in power will start to design their own citizens.
Before saying that, I have to tell something. And, you know, this is my second tour in Germany. And I had the first tour, I think, in March or April. And I said this in every speech, and I'm going to repeat it now again. Please don't take it as, you know, I'm here and I want to charm you or anything. But I do really believe in what I say. I do trust Germans about this. About what we are going through, whatever you call it, right-wing populism, authoritarianism, neo-fascism, whatever. I really do believe in Germans that they will come up with something. I did already come up with something, but, you know, to beat it in a bigger scale and to show the rest of the world how it's beaten. And I say this from the bottom of my heart because since very young age, let's say 15, I am reading Germans, you know, Hannah, Frankfurt School, and other, you know, other German philosophers and so on, obviously Karl Marx. This country has you know, obviously, an amazing tradition of philosophy. British do not have it, French has another thing, and so on. But this country knows how to look at things through logic and how to decipher the mess, the confusion, and so on. And I think I really trust Germans in this. And that's why most of my readings and most of my so-called intellectual interaction is with German writers and thinkers and so on. Designing your own citizen, that's the fifth common pattern in every right-wing populist movement all around the world. When they really gain power, this doesn't happen like day 2, and now we are designing our ideal citizen and everybody will look like it. But this happens after, you know, many years, and they design their own ideal citizen. And when it happened in Turkey, obviously the ideal citizen did not look like me. So I become redundant, and millions of people became redundant. And it's a horrible feeling because it is your home, and you know, simply it is this, your home, and your home does not want you anymore. You are not required, needed in your home anymore. It is a horrible, devastating emotion to experience that. It's really, you know, emotionally very exhausting. So obviously, right-wing populists have a societal project. They do not necessarily have an ideology other than clinging into the power and keeping it in their hands, and more power and more power. But they have a political attitude that finally uniforms the citizen. And that citizen in Turkey, for instance, now, Sunni, Turk, male, and great supporter, devoted supporter, religiously devoted supporter of Mr. Erdoğan. This is the ideal citizen. If you are one way or another not fitting with this definition, out of the game, you're not needed, welcome to leave. These are not my words, these are Erdoğan's words. You're welcome to leave, and you are not a citizen anymore, not even second class, you're not. You are a non-person, as, you know, George Orwell said once. You are a non-person. So this is But of course, I told a lot of stories from other countries in the book as well. But, you can imagine the rest, I think, right now.
But there was one thing that I also find very good, because you talk about are we all a subject of democracy, or are we an object of democracy? And there's a very everyday quote, maybe everyone has said, it's called, "Oh, I hate politics. I don't care about politics. Oh, I'm not so interested in politics." Why are you in this particular stage so critical with, "Oh, I hate politics," or "It's not my problem"?
Because I hate politics, that very sentence, is the most political statement that you can give. And it's a horrible political statement, saying that you are admitting the fact that you are not a human. I recently learned something, and I love this. Those of you who enjoy reading English, I recommend that book. It's coming out very soon. It's called People and the Power, 5 Lessons from Ancient Greece. And I learned from this book the word idiotes, idiot. You know what idiot is? It's coming from ancient Greek. It's so funny. It means a person who is not politically engaged. So that very statement, "Oh, I hate politics," makes you an idiot, basically. And it has been so since thousands of years.
Yeah, because you say the dictators can then turn you into their object, and you are no longer the subject of democracy. And after they have created their idiots, they come to number 6, and 6 is one of the most interesting chapters, I think. It talks about the role humor plays in this whole particular path. And it really made me think so much about this, because generally we think humor is a thing to save us, and humor is a sign of intelligence, and humor is a sign of not engaging into the other's hate. But Ece Temelkuran has found a very particular angle to look at the humor, which I think is a German tool as well. So can you talk about stage 6 and what is going on in there, and what's the laughter about?
I'm sorry. This, pattern of right-wing populism might not work in France. They have a horrible sense of humor. They cannot even mock their own situation. They cannot even make fun of their own, right-wing populist leaders. Anyway, so, everybody, there is one misconception, and I understand how it is like that. It's easy to fall into that trap. People today think that if they make enough intelligent jokes about, the political figures that they hate, or if they get angry enough on social media, they are politically engaged. Unfortunately, emotions and expression of emotions are not politics. It's not political engagement. It is just decharging. It is just, letting it go and so on, venting off. And political humor, for obvious reasons, for understandable reasons, in fact, thought as a resistance tool, a tool for resistance. And it does function like that when there is a real political movement that supports it, as in Gezi uprising in 2013, as in Tahrir Square in Cairo, in Tunisia, and so on. It was amazing. I was there in Cairo and in Tunis, in Beirut, when things were happening. And it was amazing to see that exactly the same jokes were made. And it was, this incredible amount of humor with incredible intelligence. And, people were flowing with humor. That's good. When there is political power behind it, it's great. You are together, you are you're in the middle of the political struggle. Of course, you have jokes and everything. But then when that political power, when that political moment and movement is gone, the jokes are still there lingering. And then it becomes, political humor, political jokes become a comfortable shelter, so to speak. You feel like as long as I can joke about this, nothing would happen to me. It's like a reminiscing of that moment that you are politically powerful, so to speak. But jokes do not make any politics at the end. And I think many countries today are suffering from this now. The amount of political humor that is, produced because of Trump, for instance, all that energy, I wish, was put into real political engagement.
So you are very critical about, for example, AOC, and we celebrate her and what happens. We make humor, we laugh, what happens? What is it that you think is something we can really do? What is the political engagement that you expect the people to take at the moment, at this current situation?
I'm writing a new book. No, actually, there are hints of it in this book already, and I really talked a lot about what might be possible and so on. But I decided to write another book as well after this, and is like a continuation of this in a way, to how not to be in this position. But it's not about not losing the countries, but not losing the faith in humankind. Because as right-wing populism takes over, or neo-fascism takes over, something happens to all of us, which is very dangerous. We started asking, even behind our heads, are humans bad, evil? Maybe, they don't even deserve to be protected, saved. Maybe this planet should go to hell anyway. This, sooner or later, when you're in this political mess, this fatalist ideas or questions, let's say, come to you. And this is a very dangerous stage for humans, especially today, in today's world where, scientists are constantly calculating the end of this planet. When we real time see every evening that climate is changing, it's not going to happen like in 10 years, it's happening now. And people are dying in hundreds in Mediterranean Sea. And it's like as if everything is a mess and there's nothing to be done anymore. And then if there is even something to be done, does it worth it? I mean, does this humankind deserve to be saved? And this is a moral question. This is not a mathematical calculation, pros and cons, positives and negatives. This is a philosophical question. This is a moral question. So, there are the beginnings of that moral issue in this book, especially in the third chapter that is very, very important to me, about shame and immorality. And I will have to expand on that to show, to humbly suggest a way out of this.
Well, since you are engaging so much and putting so much effort into humankind, I think your answer might be that it's worth saving. But we come to number 7. And the title of number 7 in German, so we have some German tonight, it's Erschaffen Sie sich Ihr eigenes Land. It's create your own country. What is the last, stage number 7? What's going on there?
It is the most tragic thing. Nowadays, it's theoretically I can go back to Turkey. There's no investigation on me, no nothing. But I prefer not to, because the unpredictability of the situation makes me obsess with the question, is something going to happen to me? And when you start thinking about that question, it becomes almost impossible to do anything. It becomes impossible to love, to write, to think, to I don't know, anything. So that is why I chose to be in another country, as if, if this was a choice, it was not really choosing something, but, I prefer not to go to Turkey, and this is how I prefer to say it. But then now I'm looking, when I was writing the book, I was thinking, this is how they create their country, in fact. All the people that would only feel safe there are the ones who fit the designed ideal citizen. And if you're not one of them, the country becomes only composed of those citizens. And that is, okay, I'll tell the word, it's very heartbreaking. And millions of people in Turkey and outside Turkey now, because there is, massive brain drain, people are going out of the country, they're heartbroken. These are the things that you cannot keep the statistics of. How many people are heartbroken in Turkey, sort of. But, lately, in last 2 weeks, there were 2 families that committed suicide. Like, as a family, they committed suicide. Because of poverty, because of several other reasons, but mainly poverty. And because they felt alone, they felt helpless. Years ago, people in Turkey were talking about social explosion because of the inequality, because of the political insanity, and so on. But unfortunately, social explosions does not happen like bomb explosions. It doesn't go boof. It happens like this, people get heartbroken and silently retreat. And I think many people in Turkey are like that. Yeah, I heard a sigh there.
I heard a sigh
That's
too.
a heartbroken person.
Ece, you speak, we have been through all the 7 stages, and I came up with a word in your interviews that I find very important for Germans as well. The very first sentence of our constitution is like, die Würde des Menschen is unantastbar. Like the dignity of a human being is something that cannot be touched. You speak very intensely about dignity and the role it plays for you. And I find it very fascinating. She speaks of how to lose a country is not like how you have to leave a country or be forced to live outside your country, but each of us can lose a country in terms of, do I feel home in the country or do I have to shut down? Is there internal immigration? And I find it very moving. It's got to do with your moral and non-factual access, the way you talk about dignity. You've traveled the USA, you've traveled Ireland, Switzerland, you've traveled many countries with this book. How do you think people react to the suggestions you make? And do you think they understand that it's about dignity? And why do you think is dignity the core issue in this whole process?
I have a diary. It's a black notebook. The pages are black. And I write with white ink. And in my black notebook today, I wrote something about yesterday's talk in Basel. And it's about this. So it's interesting you brought up. When I talk, sometimes, apparently, I perform well. Accidentally, probably. And there is a silence in the room. But it is a different kind of silence. You can touch it, and it is like, you have a word for that. You have an expression in German, people hanging in your lips, on your lips. Yeah, I don't know the German version.
Hängen an den Lippen, yeah.
Yeah. It is that kind of silence. And it only happens when I talk about dignity, actually. None of us are very enthusiastic about democracy at the moment. The word does not excite us. Who would die for democracy now? Nobody would die for democracy. But when I change that word for dignity, you wouldn't know maybe in this room, but every one of us would die for their dignity. At some point, there is a breaking point for everybody. You would, in your head, you could negotiate, like, I can do this to survive this indignified thing. I can do that. And so. But then, when it comes to real life, dignity is the thing. When it's touched, it explodes. And I think we are at that point in the world now, not only the lack of democracy, but also the savagery, the banality and the horrors of the current dominant system is touching our dignity. Not only because we are affected, we are victimized by it, but also we are fed up by watching what happened to people on the screen constantly, and being obliged to feel nothing about it breaks our dignity. And I think nobody wants to take it anymore. This is kind of silence that I'm talking about.
I would go to the last question just to bring your thinking more into the German realm. We talked about dignity, we talked about Europe and where we're going. So what do you think, I think I heard you say once that also the European countries have to feed their dignity by the horrible things that happen outside, because they remind us of where we actually are. When you look at the partnership between Europe and Turkey, or particularly Germany and Turkey, we talked about the refugees, you know about the very difficult negotiations. Just so to have you talk about something German-Turkish while you are here, and let us participate on the way you analyze this. Do you think it's, I mean, how to handle such a difficult moment where we have like these ideals of dignity, and on the other hand, a country that you say is at stage 7, and we have to negotiate in whichever stage we're in about the dignity of other people? How do you look at this conflict?
Actually, I just made this joke in Dublin for Britain, but I think that joke applies to Germany as well. Germany is also becoming a Middle Eastern country because Germans are also now waking up like we do in Turkey and getting on their phone saying, what the hell happened last night? That would embarrass me today. That is a very Middle Eastern question. That was a very Middle Eastern question until Trump came to power, until this refugee crisis, until Boris Johnson became the Prime Minister of Britain. But now we all know what vicarious shame feels like, secondhand shame, because of your leaders. Because a stupid guy, a stupid woman, whatever, makes a bargain over people with another stupid guy or a woman, and you just don't know anything about it, and then you wake up to it, and you have to suffer the shame of it. That is an unbearable thing. And this is why we need democracy. It's not because it's the best system ever, but because we know that we cannot handle the shame so long, and we shouldn't suffer the shame because of the decisions that we couldn't contribute to.
So do you think when we have the shame, when we skip the humor a little, that there is a chance to stop this process for a whole of Europe?
Of course there
Europe
is.
Is such a small entity compared to...
People love calling me pessimist. I don't know why. It's just I'm telling the truth. They are so affected by it. And, also I talked about this, addiction to hope, dependency on hope, I'm sorry. And everybody asks me like, so where is the hope? Why are you speaking so hopelessly? I'm not speaking hopelessly, and I am not, by the way, interested in the word hope. I am interested in the word of determination, and determination in every human being, which is inherent to every human being. And that determination is designed to create beauty in every sense. I do believe in this. I choose to believe in this. So I don't need hope. Lately, I was in Mantua, in Italy, in a Middle Ages, a town from Middle Age, and it was a festival. And there is a sort of mansion, a huge mansion that once belonged to Isabella dell'Este, amazing woman. 16th century woman. In her walls, she put this script in golden letters everywhere on the walls, on the ceilings. It says, "No hope, no fear." I wouldn't go that far, but I would say instead of hope, we should think about determination, because sometimes there is no hope, but there is always determination. You cannot take away determination from humankind. This is what I believe in.
The very last question in Heidelberg, the very last is because of hope. I was surprised that you would say that you have so much hope in Germans.
Yeah.
As much as I'm
I believe
pleased
in Germans.
and you believe in us, but because you read us so well, you have also read about the capacity of using this logical thinking for destruction. And I'm really curious about, because I think it's a good motivator to understand why, when Germany is the country that actually brought a lot of the fascist mess around Europe, what makes you in 2019 believe that Germany could be a country that could come up with a solution?
Do you know who invented concentration camps?
No.
You don't?
No.
Many people think that it's Germans. Actually, it is British people, government, far before Germans. And it was in Africa. They put the guys there, and nature took its, and they killed each other basically, or they starved to death. And that was the first concentration camp. So all this evil is attributed to Germans, and there are TV channels dedicated to this. The world, entire international politics, part of it is dedicated to this. But when you look at it, Germans actually Germany is the only nation that is, talking about the past and feeling the shame of the past, and not being, they're not afraid. They have not been afraid. Okay, let's say they admitted what they did. They named it. They thought about it. They did the redemption thing, and I take this very seriously. It is the only nation on this planet that did this. I'm not counting South Africa. That's another issue. But this is very important. I take it very seriously. Of course, there are, missing things. It's not perfect. And, things are happening here as well in terms of xenophobia and so on and so forth. But this is a very important philosophical, political reign that we can, follow and we can learn from.
So when we now have the first politicians who say that we have to end this kind of memory culture, that we have to change it and maybe start anew, what would you say with all the experience and thoughts of this book to such a politician or to people listening to politicians like these?
Today, I told you, I came here from Mannheim with a taxi driver. Probably he's a little bit, what do you call them? Ordinary nationalist, let's say. But I loved what he said. He was showing me the road work. You see, nobody's working there. This road work was supposed to finish 6 months ago. It didn't finish. They're not working, and so on. And he was feeling embarrassed about this. And I said, "Oh, you have the Berlin airport thing as well." And he was like, "Oh my God, yes, it didn't. It's so embarrassing." And I said, "You know what? Everything started with Volkswagen, Mercedes, that cheating the people about the emissions and so on." And he literally went red. And I go, "What is it to you?" I'm like, "You're not running the company." But I told him, "You know what? The entire world believes in you, in this machinery stuff, the logic, this, mathematical thinking and so on. And you let down the entire world." And he was about to cry. And this huge... And I said, "I'm joking. Don't take it so seriously. I'm coming from Turkey." I think politicians, should be aware that when people are embarrassed enough and when their dignity is touched, they can do anything. And today, we couldn't find a way for a better representation, and we are living through a crisis of representative democracy. All those, thousands of people in Hong Kong, in, Mexico, in, several other places in the world today, they are on the streets, they are doing politics, but their politics is not represented in the parliament. It's a horrible crisis, actually, we are going through. But at the end, they will find a way to represent themselves. Things will evolve. And politicians will not be the politicians that we know now. It will be different. Everything will be different. This is what I say. And we can make it better.
We can make it better. Thank you, Ece Temelkuran.
Thank you. And thank you for coming tonight. You were lovely. Thank you. Read the book.
Oh, we're going to just get her a little dark wine for the hotel number. You're welcome.